The desert had a reputation for being quiet, predictable, and generally uninterested in dramatic moments, which is why on this particular day, Moses expected exactly 0 surprises, just sheep, sand, and the kind of silence that made you rethink your life choices. Then came the moment that broke the pattern, a single flame, a stubborn bush, and a scene that would absolutely ruin anyone's peaceful morning. Before anything else, one thing needs to be crystal clear. The burning bush was not a hug from God. It was a red alert in the middle of the desert. No soft warmth, no inspirational glow. More like, "Hey Moses, update available, your entire life." And if someone in 1500 BC had a phone, this moment would have shown up exactly as, "Emergency alert, please pay attention immediately." Moses blinked and blinked again. The bush stayed on fire, but somehow refused to burn. Nothing says major life change like a plant catching fire and refusing to participate in the burning part. He approached slowly, the way someone approaches a suspicious email link. Not too close, not too fast, prepared to run if it tried anything. Up until 5 minutes earlier, Moses had been living what could only be described as the quiet life package, a calm existence, low expectations, high anonymity, just a former prince-turned-shepherd doing his best to stay off every radar. But that peace was about to explode. The desert around him stayed silent, as if waiting to see what he'd do next. The sheep stared at the scene like spectators in the world's slowest talent show. Moses stepped closer, trying to confirm whether this was a miracle, a hallucination, or some desert heat prank. Then the voice called his name. Not a spooky echo, not a whisper in the wind. A direct, unmistakable, attention-grabbing voice. "Moses." He froze. The sheep froze. One pebble probably considered freezing. The voice continued calmly, too calmly, telling him to remove his sandals. Moses obeyed, because when a fire that refuses to burn things starts giving instructions, you listen. It felt like stepping into a meeting he never scheduled, but somehow couldn't leave. That's when the truth hit. This wasn't encouragement. This wasn't comfort. This wasn't God giving Moses a gentle nudge. This was a warning, a divine alarm disguised as a flaming shrub. Every second made the message clearer. Something big was coming, something world-changing, and Moses was very much expected to be part of it. As he stood barefoot on suddenly holy ground, staring at the most dramatic plant in human history, he understood what the desert had been trying to hide until now. This was the moment comfort dies and calling begins. After the burning bush alert officially shattered the peace of Moses' morning, the situation moved quickly, from strange desert moment to full-scale mission briefing. And if Moses was going to understand what was happening, he needed a quick rundown of all the major players in this cosmic assignment. So here's the cast list. Short, ironic, and painfully accurate. First, Moses, former prince, current shepherd, a man who went from palace life to chasing sheep across open landscapes. Technically retired, emotionally tired, and proudly maintaining a low profile. If Moses had a resume, it would probably read, former royalty, current shepherd, high humility, high stubbornness. Next, Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, the man with absolute power and absolutely no interest in hearing the word no. A leader who firmly believed that admitting a mistake was basically dropping the crown. If denial were a sport, Pharaoh would be a 3-time Olympic champion. Then, the people. Thousands of workers living under endless pressure. Exhausted, overworked, and extremely done with the system. If the ancient world had HR, they would have filed complaints for 400 years straight. They didn't need comfort anymore. They needed change. Now that the roles were clear, the central problem snapped into focus. The burning bush wasn't offering Moses spiritual encouragement. It wasn't saying, "You're tired, here's a hug." It was saying, "You're tired, here's a plan." A very inconvenient plan. The message was simple, direct, and completely outside Moses' comfort zone. Leave the quiet life. March straight into the center of political power. Confront the biggest empire around, and demand freedom for an entire nation. No wonder Moses tried to stall. No wonder he asked questions. No wonder he hoped the assignment was optional. But the bush never blinked. The mission stood firm. If this happened today, the message would probably arrive as an email notification that ruins your whole morning. Congratulations, you've been promoted. Your first task, fire the CEO. And just like that, Moses' peaceful shepherd routine was officially over. Because calling out Pharaoh wasn't a tiny errand. It wasn't a quick conversation. It wasn't something you could handle before lunch. This was the kind of assignment that rewrites history and makes anyone rethink their life choices. Moses looked at the task, then at himself, then at the task again. The sheep offer absolutely no emotional support. Even the desert felt like it stepped back to watch. And in the middle of this moment, this mix of panic, destiny, and why me, the reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't comfort. This was confrontation. And just when Moses thought the warning couldn't get more intense, this is where the warning starts to get very serious. Moses was still standing in front of the burning bush, barefoot, confused, and wishing this situation came with an instruction booklet. But the bush wasn't interested in aesthetics or comfort. This wasn't a pretty spiritual moment. It was a tense briefing on a humanitarian crisis, delivered through fire that refused to behave. The longer Moses listened, the clearer the tone became. This wasn't encouragement. It wasn't inspiration. It was urgency wearing flames. God began outlining the situation with the calmness of someone dropping life-changing information before breakfast. The people were suffering. Oppression had reached its limit, and Moses was now the designated point of contact for fixing the entire problem. Moses tried to respond with the ancient equivalent of pressing unsubscribe on a responsibility he definitely did not sign up for. It sounded a lot like, "Are you sure this is meant for me?" It was the same energy as canceling a stubborn subscription service, the kind that keeps asking, "Are you really sure?" 5 times before letting you leave. But this time, there was no cancel button, no exit survey, no grace period, because the warning didn't come with a manual. It came only with urgency. Moses tried every angle. What if they don't listen? What if they don't believe me? What if you choose someone more qualified? What if literally anyone else? But the assignment stayed the same. Crystal clear, non-negotiable. Confront Pharaoh, lead the people out, end the tyranny that had been running uninterrupted for centuries. No pressure. The weight of the mission started to land on Moses' shoulders like a very large, very unwanted backpack. This wasn't a temporary task. It wasn't a side quest. It was a turning point in global history disguised as a flaming shrub. And the consequences? Not small. Accepting the warning meant leaving the quiet safety of shepherd life, the predictable routine, the anonymity, the peaceful days where the biggest challenge was keeping track of sheep. All of that gone. It meant walking straight into the most powerful empire on earth and demanding change from someone who didn't even like being questioned, much less confronted. It meant danger, responsibility, and headlines like, "Local shepherd attempts to negotiate with Pharaoh, more at 10. The side of the story no one talks about is the fear factor. Once Moses accepted the mission, there was no going back, no undo, no maybe later, no I'll sleep on it. This warning wasn't symbolic anymore. It was becoming real, fast. The bush burned, the voice insisted, and the future rearranged itself right in front of him. This was no longer about a strange morning in the desert. This was a call that would reshape nations. And as Moses stood there, sand under his feet, fire in front of him, destiny knocking louder every second, one truth settled in. This is the point where the warning stops being a metaphor and becomes destiny. Once Moses accepted the mission, even reluctantly, the burning bush didn't fade into a nice memory. It set off a chain reaction that would shake the ancient world like a badly secured bookshelf during an earthquake. The consequences were immediate and huge. First came confrontation, then came resistance. Then came the kind of political tension that makes every advisor suddenly pretend they're out of office. What started as a quiet morning in the desert turned into a national-scale movement in record time. Moses went straight from shepherd with sandals issues to unexpected representative of oppressed workers everywhere. And Pharaoh? He went from confident ruler to man frantically trying to figure out why his empire is suddenly glitching. Because when you show up in Egypt saying, "Hi, God sent me, please release the entire workforce," the system doesn't respond with gratitude. It responds with panic and more work for the workers. The burning bush wasn't a warm, comforting sign. It was the trigger that launched protests, miracles, negotiations, plagues, and the kind of national crisis that would absolutely break every trending chart if social media existed back then. If you needed a modern comparison, this moment was basically pressing the button labeled "Uninstall Oppression" and watching the system fight back. The warning was not poetic. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't symbolic art for Moses to post on his story with a motivational caption. It was a declaration. Things cannot stay the way they are. A line has been crossed. History is about to get rewritten whether anyone likes it or not. And Moses, now carrying the weight of that message, realized the real meaning behind the flames. The bush wasn't saying, "Be inspired." It was saying, "This cannot continue, and you're going to do something about it." That was the aha moment. The shift from personal revelation to global mission. The point where the burning bush stopped being a spectacular desert event and became the starting engine of a revolution. And Egypt felt it. Pharaoh felt it. The people felt it. Even Moses, who tried multiple times to pass the assignment to someone else, felt the pressure of what the warning had unleashed. Because warnings aren't meant to sit quietly. They move things, break things, expose cracks that were always there but ignored until the light hit them just right. What the bush began wasn't just a message, it was momentum, a force that pushed Moses from anonymity to leadership, a force that pushed a nation from despair to hope, a force that pushed an empire into crisis mode. The burning bush was the match that lit a movement, and every step forward made the consequences bigger, louder, and impossible to reverse. So if Moses thought the warning was heavy back in the desert, if he thought it was intense, then the story was only just beginning. By the time Moses stepped fully into the mission, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The burning bush was never meant to comfort him. It wasn't a spiritual spa moment. It wasn't a gentle reminder to stay strong. And it definitely wasn't one of those warm scenes artists like to paint with glowing halos and soft backgrounds. It was a warning, the kind of call that flips a person's life upside down in one sentence. In the desert, the flames had already made it clear. This wasn't about feeling better, it was about doing something. And that idea traveled far beyond Moses' timeline, because the pattern behind the warning still shows up today, just with different packaging. Sometimes the biggest turning points arrive exactly when someone is trying to stay comfortable. Sometimes the most important changes begin with something inconvenient, and sometimes what looks like a disruption is actually a direction. The burning bush represents those moments that don't ask permission to rearrange someone's life. The unexpected calls, the unavoidable shifts, the situations that don't come wrapped in encouragement, but in responsibility. In modern terms, these warnings look like unplanned invitations, the kind that force a person to reconsider everything they thought was stable, non-negotiable changes, the ones that push someone from routine into action, situations demanding courage instead of comfort, moments where staying still is no longer an option. Because that's the real point of a divine warning. It doesn't pamper, it pushes. It doesn't soothe, it shakes. It doesn't whisper, it interrupts. If the burning bush scene happened today, it wouldn't appear as fire in the desert. It would probably light up a phone screen at the worst possible moment with a message like, "Urgent, your life just changed, please respond immediately." And just like Moses, anyone receiving a message like that would stare at the screen, blink twice and think, "Now? Really?" But warnings don't follow schedules. They arrive when something needs to shift, whether the person feels ready or not. That's why the burning bush still matters, not because of the fire, not because of the miracle, but because it shows that decisive change often begins with a disruption that refuses to be ignored. The moment Moses stepped toward the flames, everything transformed. His plans, his identity, his future, and the future of an entire nation. He didn't receive comfort, he received clarity, and clarity is often more powerful than consolation. In the end, The message behind the flames was simple, sharp, and utterly life-altering. The warning wasn't meant to scare you, it was meant to wake you up. And now the question naturally follows, which biblical moment should be simplified next? David, Jonah, Samson,